So Jean, how would you describe how you became an activist?
Well, very slowly and gradually, and with some peaks in there. But I suppose when we're young, we're very receptive to new ideas. And I was fortunate that when I went to high school and college, there were some real mentors. And this is way back, but people who got us excited as young people. I think it's something like what's happening now in Vermont with this Vermont group, the SAY group of youngsters. But this was a youth movement in those days. It was after the Second World War, and I was in college then.
Where was that?
Well, it was in California, actually. And we went to conferences and had meetings, and they brought speakers, and we did various vigils and demonstrations. I think mostly connected with race relations in those days, with the peace movement. But it was the roots of all of this, and we discussed justice and peace and war and all of these issues. I can still remember their names, and I don't have a very long memory for names, but it's fascinating that I can recall their faces and images and how powerful they were in my life. So that's very important that this happens, you know, when you're young and open to new ideas, and it just clicked with me at that time.
Who were they?
Well, Edith Larigo was the national director of the YWCA movement, and Bruce McGuire was the equivalent of the YMCA movement. I think they were just had California jobs at that time in Berkeley, and a man named Walter Raitt, who was the director of our youth group when I lived in Pasadena, and who took us places and cared about us and really listened to us. This question of respect, he respected the young people. It was fascinating. So that launched us, it really did. And there were a group of wonderful young people then. Not many I'm still in touch with at this point, but I married when I was young, and so then I was more or less more involved in the personal script for many years because I had 4 children, and we lived overseas. And in Holland, what happened then? We came back to this country. I tried to get back in touch, and would, I think some of the groups that I corresponded with then and took nurturing from, I'm trying to think, would have been the Catholic Worker Movement. They have a newspaper that you can subscribe to for a penny a sheet. Dorothy Day is the mentor of that group. So what happened then?
Was this in what year? Where are
I'm
we?
trying to say, this must have been we're talking now, by now it would have been the 50s, I guess. That's when I was having children. And coming back from Holland would have been then the 60s. Kind of goes in decades almost. So let me think. We lived overseas again in the Middle East, so I was getting an education in the complexity of life there. And then we came back again to this country in the 70s. And at that point, I started a more personal development because I hadn't been employed or been a professional or even a working woman. So I went through that script, which was wonderful. I did home health care mostly for women with cancer, with families. So I did a lot of support work for families in crisis. And I eventually went to nursing school, and I got jobs in various places. I enjoyed most psychiatric nursing, so I did that actually in a prison setting and in hospital and clinic settings. But at the same time, I was reconnected. We were in the Boston area with these primary groups, and I think at that time the Reawake call came through Helen Caldecott. By now we're probably in the early 80s, and her office, she had something called the Women's Party for Survival. It was right near where I lived, and I used to bicycle up there and do office work and meet all these fascinating women. And I got my nuclear education there, at least retuned it more. And we went to Washington, D.C. for a street march and for talks. And I met there the more radical movement that was doing civil disobedience about the nuclear issue. And I got taken by them and their enthusiasm. And so I got arrested then. I believe it was at a White House vigil about a nuclear submarine that was about to be launched, and went to jail overnight. It was kind of a powerful experience.
Can you describe that a little bit more, how that worked?
Well, trying to think. I think when I went down with the Helen Caldecott group, they were there, and they had a workshop on civil disobedience, and I signed the list, and they phoned me and said, "Are you coming?" And I thought, well, yeah, again, this kind of personal contact. I said, sure. So I got on a Greyhound bus, and I went down there and met these fascinating people, and it was a very wonderful group of maybe, 10 people who just, I think we went through the White House, and then we just knelt down on the lawn and had a little vigil about not launching I think it was a submarine that was going to be called the Corpus Christi, which means the body of Christ. And so it was, in a way, a kind of religious protest against using that imagery. It was very powerful, and so we got arraigned before the judge, and he picked me out of the lineup because I guess I look more suburban and housewifey, and we had a long dialogue about nuclear weapons at that point.
With the judge? With
the judge, yes. So I got my voice at that point. And I think he gave us community service. There was no... But I kept connection with this group, and you probably heard of them. It's they're still going. That's what's so fascinating. It takes the symbolism from this chapter in Isaiah about you'll beat your swords into plowshares and your swords into pruning hooks, and they called themselves the Plowshares Witness, and it's Phil Berrigan and Dan Berrigan and the Catholic left, I guess you would name it, but they're really very exciting people. And so I got involved with that group fairly actively in the early 80s then, and as well as local things where I was in Boston at a place called Draper Labs, which was doing the research for nuclear weapons, the missile guidance system. So we would vigil there and get arrested for civil disobedience regularly. And so I went to jail then in Massachusetts, which was kind of crossing the line experience at that time, because I'd been on the staff as a nurse at the same prison that I went back to then as an inmate, so that was fun. It was a good lesson in being very careful in how you...
So you're talking about you were doing civil disobedience at the Draper Labs?
At Draper Labs,
yeah.
Where they did the research for the missile systems for the submarines. And then I was involved with a lot of Connecticut witness because they just finished launching, commissioning Tridents there recently. They did 18 altogether, but we were in when they were in lower numbers, so we used to vigil regularly in Connecticut about Trident submarine. And I was arrested there when we went into the shipyard, in one of these plowshares things. So that was the kind of the New England, very passionate years, I guess. Those were the Cold War years, I guess, and it was. I have files still, which I have never really resorted, but material from children who were talking about their nuclear fears, and there was a great feeling. I had dreams, you probably had dreams too, and I can remember sitting after being arrested in police cars or talking to jail personnel or to the women in jail, and there was this recurrent nuclear material. They had dreams too of the end of the world and where would they find their children and all. So this was kind of common material, I think, in those years.
Yeah.
So it united us in some way. I mean, people would tell you they really believed in what you were doing, but and so on. And I never really thought that we should get into a hierarchy of who did what, you know. It was just as important to do whatever you could do, but even telling somebody that you believed in what they were doing was just as important, I thought, a great act of courage on their part. But those, you know, those were the times. What did had happen then? Then
How much jail time did you spend before you get into the next phase? What were some of those experiences like?
Off and on, I've never kept track. I spent one period of 3 months once in Massachusetts for what we called the Avco plowshares. We went into they were building MX missiles in Wilmington at a plant there. And I always didn't mind jail time in those days. I'm sure it's changed now, but there's a sort of a women's community that forms, and I always felt very supported by the women. So I would participate in all the things, and we ended up counseling younger women and folding peace cranes and doing ping pong. I mean, whatever you do, you just did it, you know. I must have learned how to, I don't know, sew and bowl and do all sorts of things. Those were interesting times. I never had a problem with them. I think it was a strain on the marriage, of course, that kind of separation. But at any rate, what happened?
How about with kids?
The kids were older by that time. You see, I think that's why I felt free to do it. I think there's a period when you're raising children, they're off on their own, you know, they're getting married or doing their thing. So they were fine and very supportive. What did happen, though, and I think changed the direction of everything, was I had gone into the Trident yard in Rhode Island where they were making the tubes for the Trident missiles, and we had done the same thing there and gotten arrested. We were out of jail, and after the arrest we were awaiting trial, and my daughter was killed in Dorchester, and she had 2 small children, and this was before the trial, so these were tough times. And I think Martin was in jail at the time. He'd done something out in Kansas on a missile silo. So we were, had to deal with all of this at the same time. And actually what happened was that we had this very, very severe judge who believed in the letter of the law. And he's quite famous still. He's the sentencing judge in Rhode Island. And we had a lawyer who was very nice and helped us a great deal. And there was a prosecuting attorney who finally alerted us to the real dangers we were in as a group then, and who sacrificed himself in a way, although I think I've wanted to get in touch with him. He says, well, anyway, what happened is that this prosecuting attorney, who could see that we were about to be sentenced to a long jail time, offered us a plea bargain. And he said that he would drop this charge, which carried all the jail time, something about possession of burglary tools, which would cut the fence or something. But it could send us to jail for 10 years. And we hadn't paid much attention to that. If we would plead guilty to trespass, which had a maximum sentence of 1 year. And he actually set the stage for us to do this, how we would get up in court and so on. And so we did this. The judge was just furious. He gavelled the courtroom and he walked out. It was in the newspapers later too, but what it did was to rescue us so that the judge could only sentence us to 1 year, which he of course promptly did. That was bad enough, because I was separated from the grandchildren and so on. And of course the other side of it was that many other family members and community helped with those children. So when I was paroled then, after something like 9 months, I went back to that family group and so on. So it was a particularly stressful time. And after the death, I was involved very much with child care for a while, and after that, I never really did go back to the marriage. And I settled in Boston briefly, and then I moved up here to Vermont, where Martin had moved, and by that time, he was out too, and I started my Vermont roots then. It would have been
Do you have a sense of what the impact was of doing the civil disobedience, the vigils, during that period? You say about 5 years in the 80s of, at the submarine bases
right.
and the Draper Laboratory, all those places. Do you have a sense of?
I don't know. I couldn't put any analysis, social or political analysis on it, but I think there was a profound connecting theme there, and there were lots of small groups meeting on a regular basis in those days, which we don't seem to have now. I think there were a lot more people out in the streets for vigils and demonstrations. I'm sure it must have had an impact. Of course, the greatest one was, what would it have been? I'm trying to think. The fact that the Cold War ended and did it without a nuclear war is an astonishing and wonderful thing. So I don't know who to give the credit for that. But I think the fact that people cared about what was going on was always there. I don't know. I don't. Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
You could not do it though.
Right.
Yeah. It's about what it amounted to. And I think that people, again, the private conversations you had were always astonishing. There was this, I don't believe anybody really wanted a nuclear war. It was just how you went about saying no to it that caused the controversy. And of course doing what we did, which is what they would call, property damage, is a little controversial, rather minuscule in the long scale. And it made people think, what is property?
What kind of damage did you actually do?
Well, it was all symbolic, you could make a lot of funny jokes about it too. We would take these hammers in that were all decorated. And, I'm sure it was some damage. I remember going into this AFCO plant. We had made these kind of phony badges, but they also had a biblical quotation on the back. We just walked in or went through doors and wandered through. We were in 3 little groups, and one group got to the actual, I think it was the MX place, and pounded on that. One woman who was a grandmother actually destroyed some sort of a sensing machine that had to do with the missiles, and we pounded on the door, and the door flew open, and it was where they were doing the planning and design for the so-called MX Peacekeeper. So it was rather visual, We took all these plans of the MX Peacekeeper and threw them on the floor and poured blood on them, and that's a powerful statement. So what is, then they would assess the damages. I don't know. They would say it might have been in the thousands. Whoever knows.
How did you get in? How did you just walk in?
That's always the amazing part, We just walked in broad daylight that time. I don't know what it is. I guess maybe it's a naivete that gets you into these places. One time we cut a fence and walked in. One just kind of snuggled under, I don't think that, and again, it would be a security issue. It got to be a flat because the security people would always get very alarmed that there is such easy access to these places. And there is the possibility, quote, that terrorists could get in with bombs. So there was always that. I don't know whether that's good symbolism or not, but we were totally peaceful and nobody ever harmed us, and we never harmed anybody. I'm not sure that I would do that kind of witness now. I think that the pace is different, and I still am very admiring of the people who are continuing these kinds of witness. There's a group in jail in Maine now, that recently did a plowshares action in Maine. What has happened in Maine is it's caused a great deal of community support, and there's weekly vigils now at the Bath shipyard and lots of community people out. So it erases the issue locally to a high degree. That's part of an answer to your question.
Yeah.
It may not get in the national papers, but it's certainly very knowledgeable of what's going on there now. So that's good. I myself, I can't do that kind of a thing anymore. I don't want to risk long jail time. I have a feeling that I want to make a bigger connection with environmental issues, and I know quite how to do that in a more positive way. I haven't gotten any easy answers. But I think coming and to live in Vermont has changed my perspective quite a bit.
Yes, talk about that.
Well, coming here and settling here on land, you know, Martin, my son, had originally gotten us to become focused on Vermont and a more sustainable lifestyle. This house is solar, and we heat with wood, and we grow our vegetables, and although we've updated a little bit, you know, the TV sets and so on. But it's still pretty basic, and I find a great pleasure in that and find it very sustaining. And I think once you develop this more intimate, closer connection living in Vermont, that it slows you down a little bit. And you want to honor that connection in as great a way as you can when you do your no saying, and I don't know quite how to do it yet. I have found a lot of fun with the local group, the Vermont Coalition, and at first it seemed a little slow, and I was a little restless. When are we going to, quote, do something, you know? Whether I'm aging or over the years, they've become very, very dear people, and the quality of just their persistence and doing vigils regularly at St. Johnsbury and regularly having meetings and traveling when they need to has been, for me, very, very comforting and very changing in a way. And I'm getting wider contact with environmental groups now. I have a friend who lives in Florida, and her life has been spent trying to maintain the natural environment of water in her area in Florida, which is very overdeveloped. And that kind of witness is just as important as anything else that's going on. And I don't know how it all ties together, but somehow this little group in Vermont seems to do as good a job as any.
The coalition.
The coalition, the
Yeah.
great coalition, yes, with these wonderful women. And now we have a new input of energy with the youth group, which I don't know what this means, but it's like things keep coming around, don't they? So.
Just tell me a little bit more about building.
You have to speak loud. You know, speak a little louder and give me a little pause. You know, after I say something before you start.
So did you build this place?
Well, the family did. I of course pounded nails too. It was Martin's inspiration, and the brothers and the other family members all helped. But this was the original back to the land house, which was done with hand tools and so on. It's changed a lot. We've added and subtracted. This is a newer addition that I can live in a little more comfortably. We put in plumbing and so on. So yeah, this is it. They were city boys, but they figured out how to do it. It's great. It really is. I think there's a connection to the land which has changed me enormously. And I also think, and I don't know how it quite, but something happens in Vermont that's more sustaining. This coalition has been going on for years and years. It hasn't stopped, right? I went to a meeting over in Maine recently and met old friends from Boston, and those local support groups, they phased out. They're not continuing. So,
What is it about?
So-
What is the connection, do you think?
what is it? Is it something about Vermont that people are, I don't know. I don't know, but it's fascinating, yeah. Yeah.
What do you think is the secret ingredient of the coalition?
Well, a rather remarkable group of older women. I call them because they're my elders too, you know, and have had the energy. And yeah, they're very special. You're, I guess, interviewing them. Yeah, I feel they're junior in many ways. So, and I think there's a whole new younger generation. I mean, you're part of the mid-generation, and then they got the youth. So. Living in Vermont is not all that I do. I still have kept that a regional but also a kind of international sense. Maybe that comes from having lived in Holland and the Middle East as younger. But So I've returned as a volunteer to, particularly in Central America, and developed connections there. I've been to Nicaragua and Honduras as a medical volunteer, and Guatemala. Something very close to me has been the resettling of people in this country, so that I have a very close family that came from the Middle East that are all settled in this country, who came from Syria and Lebanon, and we helped them as children come here. And then a family from Vietnam who lives in Newton, Massachusetts. And they're my second family. So I don't know, how do you say it? The personal is political and international and everything. But those were things I did in the 60s and 70s, I guess.
Okay. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you say more about the idea about, you talked about being a witness, or a way to be to witness? Can you say more?
For me, it's always been important that I experience whatever is going on. I just can't go to meetings, although I know that people can live that way. But I think part of what changed me was actually seeing a Trident submarine go out to sea and vigiling on the rocks near it. So I think I need to take my body wherever whatever I'm doing, that's all. And sometimes it's a lot of fun, you know. We used to, where did we go? We went to Peace Air Force Base, which is in New Hampshire, and they used to have a statue of, a mushroom cloud statue, that was it, because that was this base was their, whatever it is, squadron, you know. And we used to go and decorate that every year with peace cranes, which are, again, symbolic of the Sadako story. And I just found that very, very personally important to do. Mm-hmm. Some sort of ceremony and testimony that we can do in that way. We used to get arrested from time to time doing that.
There's actually a statue of a mushroom cloud?
It's gone now. Peace Air Force Base is no more, you know. That's history, thank goodness. Huh?
You're talking about shifting more toward environmental concerns and how to connect, how to find out how to be a witness for those. Can you talk a little more about that?
Well, I think it's a long-range problem more now. We're not just having nuclear weapons. Oh, they're still there. We need to go. I still do that. I still go to Connecticut, but what I've talked to you about, which is the Sierra Blanca, the town in Texas. There's a compact that we're about to send Vermont's low-level radioactive waste there. We've got to do something about that. And that's an environmental issue that pertains to all of us. The nuclear waste issue, it's bigger than the weapons. And it's also, I guess I want to become more connected, I keep trying, to not just being involved with causes that are concerned about human life. There's a deeper philosophical and personal connection we need to make with other species and with nature itself. And I think somehow that has to be happening in my own life too, as well. I was in Florida. I went on an environmental walk in Florida. That was helpful to me personally. And while I was there networking, I went to a conference on the Gulf, the state of the Gulf waters, and a woman from Texas came up to me. She looked at my name tag and she said, "You're from Vermont?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, what are you doing in Vermont with the compact with Texas to send your radioactive waste?" And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about." And she immediately filled me in. She was from the Audubon Club in, I believe, Houston, Texas, that Vermont and Maine have a contract, I guess, which is now up before Congress, to ship their radioactive low-level waste to Texas. Not only is it going to Texas, it's going near the Rio Grande, which has serious environmental concerns about polluting the whole Gulf, but it's also going to a town which is quite vulnerable called Sierra Blanca, which is a Hispanic town near the Rio Grande border. So I thought that this was something I needed to come back to Vermont with, and I'm trying to network up here about this issue and see what we can do. Well, this walk in Florida was particularly targeted to show us what happens to the areas where industry has taken itself, and they seem to be more depressed and poor areas like the phosphate mining and the citrus groves, and we were led by Native Americans who could connect us with Mother Earth through all this. And then to hear about what Vermont is doing, which is supposed to be an environmental state, and to hear that this nuclear waste is going to a small town, which is a poorer town economically than we are. I guess they label this environmental racism, but it's unacceptable. And I think we need to make those connections. Well, so people have asked me sometimes about these more active days of mine and how I managed to do that. And I'm always a little puzzled about what answer to give, because in a way, the direct experience for me is always the more fun one. I'd rather do that than sit in meetings or talk in public. But the very fact that you're entering into this area where the nuclear material is, whether it's a submarine or it's a plant where they're being designed, I think it's a terribly important connection that I had to make personally. And we can't do that now perhaps so much, but in one time, what did we do? We took a canoe. In fact, that canoe is still up here in Vermont. We painted it black. We launched it across the Thames River. There were 3 of us in the canoe. I think we dumped once and lost our hammers, but we got back in. We paddled across. We came up beside a nuclear submarine while it was under construction. It was enormous, and we were down in this little canoe. There's something about that kind of experience. And these people were way, way up there saying, "What are you doing?" you know. And it's just awesome, that kind of feeling that you get about these weapons of total destruction. And of course, eventually the Coast Guard came and fished us out and got the canoe, and we all got wet and dunked, and they fed us cocoa, and the story goes on. But I wouldn't have not done that for anything.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, hold on a second.
Yeah.
the part about the children.
Oh, okay, all right,
Yeah.
let's go back to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, just
the
start.
theme that kind of tied it all
Yeah,
together.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
your first grandchild.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Start again.
Well, as this has been going on, I've been reflecting on the early years, and not only is what happened with nuclear emergency in the Cold War and the passion of Helen Caldecott that caught us, but I think my response was due to the fact that I had just had my first grandchild born in 1981, I guess it was. So this all came together for me, and this terrific concern about the fate of the children. And I had to make a personal response, and a very direct one. And the grandchildren have survived as well as many, many other children. But what we do with that passion now, as the issues become more environmental and less directly war-making, and how we experience those directly ourselves. I think what I've ended up doing in these last years is a lot of networking, which puts me in personal contact with exciting groups, not only here in Vermont, but also in Florida, where there's a great coalition for peace and justice. I travel to Wisconsin regularly, where I have children, and there's some powerful people doing nuclear and environmental work there. And it's not just anecdotal and it's not just personal, but it's important that we keep these connections.
and honor them. So I think the travel and seeing people and places, for me, has taken on a high priority.